Apollo Justice doesn't really need fixing, but I'm gonna do it anyway. Or at least try. This video will be the first in a duo looking over the game Apollo Justice Ace Attorney and rewriting parts of it. In this video, I will go over the problems that people have with Apollo Justice and some problems that I have with it myself, but I'll go on to mention why you can't really fix the game, at least not too much. If you want more, check out my video where Apollo Justice went wrong after you watch this one. No, Apollo Justice Ace Attorney isn't bad, and I'm not going to pretend that it is for clicks. But in my opinion, it's probably the weakest game in the series when you look on a per-case basis. Turnabout Trump is a fantastic start, and it'll probably be mostly kept when I rewrite the game. Turnabout Corner is a fun, yet forgettable case. I definitely don't hate it, but it's not great. Turnabout Serenade is the worst case in the entire series, I can't wait to review it, and Turnabout Succession is a mess. It's not bad or anything, it's just very weak for a finale. But this doesn't make it a bad game. Maybe it's a bad Ace Attorney game, but honestly, for a series that has released 10 games and a crossover, none of them has been bad games, and that's quite amazing. I think there's a bit of a disconnect between some people. If I were to criticize Apollo Justice and call it bad, I'll say that I don't mean it's a bad game in a vacuum, it's just a poor Ace Attorney game. Especially when you consider one of the best visual novel games of all time preceded it. However, it certainly has a bunch of weak points that place it firmly in the mid, as the kids say, category of games in my opinion, which makes it a bad Ace Attorney game like I said. Apollo Justice's most glaring flaw as a game is its failure to properly establish Apollo Justice, the character, as a protagonist. Because he isn't. He isn't the protagonist of his own game. Phoenix Wright is. That's not a good way to write a game if you ask me. Especially for a series like Ace Attorney, the character you play as needs to be the main character, or at least have a stake in the story, right? Think about it. Past Nick being his idol apparently, and Apollo just being a good dude, what reason does Paulie have to care about the entire conflict in the last chapter? The game doesn't help either. You'd think he'd care more since Kristoff was his mentor, but he kinda just doesn't. Not all that much at least, not as much as you'd expect. Let's go and make a comparison to the first game, right? In this game, Miles Edgeworth is the real main character. Think about it. He has an entire arc in cases 2 to 4, and even in the bonus case, Rise from the Ashes, which is of course written after. But we don't feel like he's stealing the spotlight from our player character, because Nick has a good reason to care. The game establishes, kind of in a janky way to be honest, that Nick and Edgeworth have a previous relationship. Platonic, of course, you filthy animals, get your mind out of the gutter. And the game slowly builds on this over the course of 3 cases, developing Edgeworth and growing the friendship that him and Nick have. This makes the conclusion and Turnabout Goodbyes feel very earned for both Nick and Edgeworth. You feel fulfilled helping out your friend, and Nick manages to finally pay him back for defending him in that class trial all those years ago. Now, let's look at Apollo Justice. For one, the story is literally just entirely about Phoenix, and that's okay, as pointed out in my previous points. However, the game fails to really establish a proper connection between Apollo and Phoenix, and banks really hard on the fact that the player themselves will have a connection to Phoenix. But, as Nick is an entirely different character in this game to literally any other appearance in the series, it doesn't really work. We don't feel like this is the Phoenix we all know and love from the trilogy. He's way, way too different for the connection to transition over. And the fact that we don't play as him and can't hear his internal monologue is a massive hurt to that as well. Apollo himself is a perfectly fine character to play as. He's pretty typical, but he's funny, and it's not really jarring or anything jumping from Phoenix in Ace Attorney 3 to Apollo in Ace Attorney 4. He's definitely not a blank slate like Phoenix was in his first appearance. He really lacks self-confidence sometimes, and tries to overcompensate by using his cords of steel. I think that this works for this point in the series, as they'd figured out that fans aren't really inserting themselves onto the protagonist, but instead strapping themselves in and going along for the ride with him. Another compounding issue is that the case quality in this game is poor, and it peaks really early, like literally as early as possible. It peaks in case 1, and no, this isn't me being an anti-Apollo edgelord or something. You guys told me this. In this poll, see, 60% of you voted for Turnabout Trump, the first case in the game, as being the best. When I asked a couple days later what you thought the best case in the first game was, I got this result. 74% of you picked the finale case, Turnabout Goodbyes, and another 21% picked the bonus case, Rise from the Ashes. That's bad. The result for Apollo Justice, I mean. No piece of media, except for maybe like a music album, is good if it peaks immediately. It means that your enjoyment level is only going to go down and down as the game progresses, as you're wishing you were back at the start, having fun again. This isn't to say that Apollo Justice goes down in quality with every case. I'll take the finale over Serenade any day. But I'd also take stepping on 18 Legos, one after the other, over Serenade, so that's no surprise. Subscribe, by the way. Got a case review, or I guess case roasting coming up on that after I'm done with this two-parter. I just love negativity. But back on topic. It's gonna feel like it's going downhill the further and further away you get from that peak. Not because each case is worse than the next, like I said. It's just that as you get further and further from that peak with no end in sight, each case will feel that way, but in a vacuum we can look at them objectively. I think that Justice for All is a fantastic example, not only because it also has 4 cases, but because I think it actually structures them well. I didn't do a poll or anything, but I'm willing to bet that case 1 would be the lowest, the finale the highest, and case 2 the second highest by far, as Big Top is bad and memed on to death, so I don't see how a lot of people are going to vote for it being the best case in the game. This method of placing the cases works very well. The intro is short, as is typical for Ace Attorney. So even though it's bad, it doesn't really overstay its welcome at all, and it works fine as a tutorial, even if it is, pretty bad. Case 2 is the real hook. It introduces the investigation, it introduces a new mechanic for people who have played the previous game, it introduces Franziska von Karma, and it's a high-stakes trial for fans who played the first game, as we not only wrap up the little Maya story from the end of the first game where she leaves, but we also have to defend her again when it looks really bad for her. The player has already built up an emotional connection to her in the first game, so it all hits that much harder. Big Top, Case 3. It's bad, right? We can all agree. And yes, I get comments like 5 times a week, and probably going to be daily now after this, telling me that they like Big Top. But come on, you're lying to yourself. It's not good. Let's stop pretending, okay? But that's okay, because the finale, the case right after it, is arguably a top 5 case in the entire series, including the crossover and the spin-offs. This method of hitting a high point in Case 2 and then again in Case 4 works very well. Because think of it, right? You're probably hooked on Justice for All after Case 2, and Case 3 isn't really all that bad until you reflect on it later. So you'll most definitely play Case 4 after playing it, and then the game ends on its highest note, with the final chapter being regarded as the best. But, as demonstrated, that just doesn't work with Apollo Justice. Cases 2 and 3 just aren't good enough. If either Case 2 or Case 3 was regarded as pretty dang good, not even like top tier, this game would be thought back upon very differently. Again, Case 2 itself isn't bad, but it's not particularly good, which is not really normal for Ace Attorney. Case 2s have an automatic advantage, as they're what generally open up the world for the player. Except for that one time where you're like, locked on a ship, but that was really good too. Case 2s introduce Investigation and the Prosecutor, who's usually one of the best characters in the game. Speaking of, I like Klavier Gavin. Don't get me wrong, but he has so much wasted potential in this game. and I guess the whole series as well. They kind of screw him over in the next few releases as well. I get that they wanted to have Pain remain in the game as a bit of an homage to the trilogy, but come on. You can't tell me that Turnabout Trump wouldn't have somehow been better if Klavier Gavin was the prosecutor. Not having him be in this case, it's just kind of sad in retrospect. It would honestly help out Turnabout Succession a bit. There's a lot more wrong with that case, which I'll get to a bit more in the second part to this video, and in its eventual case review, but having Klavier be there to find out that his brother was just a filthy murderer all along would help tie everything in a lot more. So come on, let's put him in Turnabout Trump, yeah? Because think about it, he was there for the Phoenix Wright forgery. I get that he doesn't really need much more of a reason to be invested, as it's his brother who's the main villain. That's like enough of a reason to begin with. But it would really help intertwine him in the story a lot more if he's the prosecutor in Turnabout Trump. But that's just a taste of what we'll get in the next video. But more on that, I don't think the game uses him in the main story nearly enough. And you'd think that they would. He has a similar issue to Franziska von Karma. He doesn't really serve a purpose in the story of any meaningful value. And he even has what is essentially his own case. It's just really shitty, so that hurts him even more. I think that his character archetype could have been used a lot more. Every other prosecutor is just a giant dick at some point or another. And you'd think that he would be too. I mean, he's got the whole rockstar thing going on, and you know what they say, don't meet your heroes. But I'd meet him, he seems like a pretty chill guy. Like, how many times are they gonna make a guy that just says like, fuck justice, I wanna win? And no, that was not a Rule 34 joke, because we're talking about alright, whatever. Come on, that helps no one. Stop. The Japanifornian legal system needs to stop hiring these narcissistic assholes, and maybe their court system would be in a better place. They did the dark age of the law to themselves. All in all, actually use this dude in Ace Attorney 7, please. Please. When I talked about the game peaking early, I didn't mention why the ending just falls so flat. Succession will be better served with a much longer case review video, but I'll touch on a little bit here. The Mason system is kind of confusing in universe, and it takes such a long damn time to do anything. Like, genuinely, I'm fine with long investigation sections as long as the trials are also really badass, but off the top, I can't even name like any cool moments from this trial, other than like the final breakdown scene. And that's a good scene to implant in your player's mind, don't get me wrong, but a finale needs some more memorable shit, right? Like, okay, from Goodbyes, I remember the intro scene on the boat, which is perfect, by the way. I remember the parrot, and I remember Phoenix gathering the courage to save Von Karma just as Cornered comes in. From Succession, I remember Vera Misham passing out in the courtroom. That's about all I've got. I mean, that's a big plot point. If you've played the game, you'll probably remember it regardless. And look, I'm a big fan of the whole shy, quiet type thing, but I didn't really give a damn about Vera past my like normal caring about peopleness. I don't know, I think I'm pretty nice, but I didn't care about Vera much past that. Glad she's okay though. Hate needless deaths. Honestly, the flashback part of the trial is fine, but it's kind of carried by the nostalgia factor. Again, not gonna hate it too much. It's very short, of course, and it provides some much needed context for the game, but even then, I don't know, it kind of falls flat for me. Even though I enjoy it, I feel that it should have been better, right? Getting to go back to the old sprites, and the old music, and the voice clips, that should have been all-time great stuff. But it's just not, and something about it's a bit off. If you're a massive fan of this section, I don't blame you. Again, I love how at home it feels after playing the trilogy, but something's just a bit off here. But yeah, the whole mystery in this trial, or in this case, is a bit convoluted, but it's also kind of obvious at the same time. It's kind of hard to explain. If you haven't somehow played it yourself, you'll understand what I mean once you get around to playing it yourself. I'm not sure about how I feel at the jury bailout at the end, to be honest. I go back and forth on it, I don't know. My main criticism is that it further pushes the game Phoenix Wright's way, as he's the one who set it all up. Like, it just feels so weird to me that the story isn't just a little bit more about Apollo Justice, considering who his mentor is. Like, he should have a real connection with Christoph Gavin, right? But the game doesn't leverage it very well at all, and it's felt pretty hard in the finale. See, it's just like what I mentioned with Klavier. This game is not good at leveraging its new characters and their relationships with each other, and it's worse for it. But again, of course, Apollo Justice is a game about Phoenix Wright, but that doesn't mean he needs to get the final comeuppance. Let's go back to the first game again. Despite Edgeworth having literally all the stake in the final trial, and the entire game being about him, Nick is the one who put the nail in the coffin on Von Karma. And that's okay. Shu Takumi could have and arguably should have done the same thing here. Apollo just gets upstaged over and over again in his own game. That really sucks. I was done with Phoenix Wright. I was ready to throw his character away after the trilogy. I was ready for the new generation of games. I was ready for the new generation of characters. But Capcom had other ideas and sales targets to meet. So look, I get it. He kind of needed to be here and be prominent. But maybe not this prominent, guys, come on. There's a few problems that I'm gonna encounter when trying to rewrite bits of this game in order to improve it. See, there's a general belief that we have two trilogies right now in Ace Attorney. There's the original 3 that were originally released on the Game Boy, and Capcom agrees, as they use the trilogy branding, and the games have one overarching plot. Namely the last 2, as they decided to turn those games into the trilogy, but important things from the first game are important all the way through. The fan base believes that Apollo Justice, Dual Destinies, and Spirit of Justice all form one trilogy as well, and I'm not certain I agree with this completely. While these games do share plot elements, I think that Dual Destinies is a bit too disjointed from Apollo Justice to make it a true trilogy. Partially due to 3 main characters battling for screen time, but I think it's mostly due to the change in staff. Shu Takumi was out, and Takashi Yamazaki was in. I'm willing to bet that once Ace Attorney 7 comes out, we'll consider Dual Destiny, Spirit of Justice, and whatever Ace Attorney 7 is going to be called, more of a trilogy than we consider the 3 games we have now. Although, those 2 games that we have now aren't the most connected plot-wise right now. But Ace Attorney 7 will probably change that, if you think back to how Trials and Tribulations managed to really tie in all 3 games. This leaves Apollo Justice in sort of a limbo. It's kind of like the bridge between the trilogy and Dual Destinies, right? But it's kind of a weak bridge, especially right at the beginning, the trilogy side. They didn't carry a lot over. But it does enough to introduce some aspects of the world while connecting the series. This is where the main difficulty is going to come. I still have to manage to fit Ace Attorney 4 in with the rest of the series. I'm gonna be like stepping into the role of Shu Takumi with a time machine. I've jumped from 2007 to 2013 and saw where Yamazaki would take my baby. I need to make it fit better. This means we can't really remove characters, and Phoenix is still gonna be a hobo. But it also means we'll have to keep the general plot of the game. Some things will be changed, but the story's gonna have to be about the disbarment and retribution of Phoenix Wright. Sorry, Apollo. You'll get your own game in like 2016 or something. But it'll still be called Phoenix Wright because we need to sell copies in North America, just so you know, buddy. Of course, there's other issues that are out of my control, like the no spoilers rule, or the series just kind of pretending that Apollo Justice never really happened. So basically, you can't fix Apollo Justice, because Apollo Justice is the glue holding everything together. And if you try to fix around the glue, you may weaken the bond. You can really only tweak it a bit. Thank you for watching, and subscribe. I see ya!